This review contains spoilers for Scream 6. Hello, I'm G, and I'll be your host today on Reviews from Hell. 4 survivors of the Ghostface murders leave Woodsboro behind for a fresh start in New York City. However, they soon find themselves in a fight for their lives when a new killer embarks on a bloody rampage. That's right, baby. Today on Reviews from Hell, we'll be covering the brand new entry into the Scream franchise, Scream 6. Directed by Tyler Gillett and Matt Benalente-Olpin, written by James Vanderbilt and Guy Busick, the film stars Melissa Barrera, Jasmine Savoy Brown, Mason Gooding, Jenna Ortega, Hayden Panettiere, and Courtney Cox, alongside Jack Champion, Henry Czerny, Liana Liberato, Dermot Mulroney, Devin Nakota, Tony Revolori, Josh Segura, and Samara Weaving. I did a lot of prep for this film and for this review, but it somehow didn't include a rewatch of the first 5 Scream movies. But in the days leading up to this fateful Thursday night where I would see Scream 6, I watched Scream 1 through 4 kill count recounts from Dead Meat, the Scream 2022 kill count, why Scream 2022 is a perfect Scream movie from FilmSpeak. I watched Jenna Ortega on Hot Ones. Do You Even Scream, a short film by Andrew Hara. What Scream 2 is really about from One Take. Scream, Woodsboro to New York, a Scream documentary 2023 by Drum Dums. And 2 AI-generated Scream 1 through 5 plot recaps to show my boyfriend who has not seen a single Scream movie but accompany me to this one. I felt adequately prepared to watch this film, having all this content watched under my belt and also having covered all the major trailers for this film on Infamous Virus. I called Ghostface, I reacted to the Super Bowl trailer, I reacted to the regular trailer, and I reacted to the teaser trailer. In a brief summary, Scream 6 is a fun watch. There's some good laughs and a few good scares. The film has several really well-executed suspenseful scenes as well. Though there's a lot more things I liked than disliked on my list, this is still not a perfect movie. It's got a few flaws. But overall, this film does a really good job of continuing on with the characters, themes, and legacies carried over from Scream 5. Except for one character. Sidney Prescott's absence is carried out with respect. And I'm really glad they chose to do this over having a character make an off-screen phone call and return to the rest of the characters with a statement from Sydney that would leave a bad taste in everyone's mouth. I'm glad that they respected that Nev wasn't happy with her potential salary and totally didn't destroy Sydney's character.
I like that ending.
The movie is well written. It's not littered with cringy lines, cameos, or an overindulgent amount of Easter eggs to previous entries in the franchise or other horror flicks. No one half-asses their acting. Everyone in the cast delivers a wicked performance, minus a few times certain characters are stabbed, but then totally fine 20 minutes later. The cinematography is great. I saw a Twitter thread talking about the geography the cinematography presents in the 90s Scream movies, and I totally agree. Here's some tweets from a thread by Twitter user Eric Lornick talking about the subject that really opened my eyes to the difference in the feeling visually between the old and new Scream movies. What I want more than anything from a new Scream film is the establishment of memorable locations via tracking shots and anamorphic lensing. More chase scenes is great, but none of them will even touch the first 2 movies if the geography isn't established. I will say, I still miss this more than anything. Craven could be a very elegant director, and his scenes never felt like edited together coverage, and that made the settings feel more lived in and memorable. Pop me outside the Omega Beta Zeta house, the Windsor Quad, the inside-outside anywhere in the houses of Scream 1, and I'd instantly know where I was. Cutting between a lot of close-ups can heighten intensity, so I understand a preference for that. I just think the scope of the 90s movies set them apart from everything else slasher movies had done, and even if most audiences can't articulate it, that's why they're so watchable. Even though the film was shot in Montreal, Canada, it replicates the Big Apple extremely well. The New York setting is refreshing. I think after 5 movies, there's only so much you can do in Woodsboro. And I mean, setting the film during Halloween added basically nothing to the plot, but it was so fun playing horror movie Where's Waldo in any crowd scenes, looking for movies and pop culture references in people's costumes. It's also just terrifying when there's ghost faces all around you. If you were hiding from someone with a costume mask that you can get at a Halloween store at the time of year when everyone's wearing costume masks around town, that's terrifying. New York gave us a flashy, modern setting. It gave us alleyways and subways and upped the population by a couple million to raise the stakes of Ghostface's public killings being caught, which is terrifying because no one in a city this big ever sees it happening. A city of millions and no one heard Samara Weaving's character, Laura, screaming as she was stabbed to death. Speaking of the opening, that was one part of the movie I really enjoyed. Right off the bat, you assume as soon as Laura walks into the alleyway that she's going to die. You expect her date, Reggie's, to turn into Roger L. Jackson's Ghostface voice at any minute. But instead it sounds like her date's going to be the victim instead for a little bit there. and we only hear it over the phone, which would be a new thing for the franchise to do. As the scene progresses and Laura is killed and Ghostface's identity is revealed, I was like, awesome, we're gonna know who the killer is the whole time. A little weird they didn't do the slicey title card opening that they usually do with the first kill, but whatever, this concept is cool. And I also thought it was really cool that he was doing these killings and also a part of the, or not a part of the friend group, but he knew Tara enough to call her, which is interesting. But this is unfortunately ruined a few minutes later when the Ghostface copycat is killed, which brings this film's total Ghostface count up to 6 people, not counting the Ghostface costume-clad New Yorkers on the subway. And while we're at it, let's briefly touch on the subway scene. It was so cool and interesting to see how they cut it together in the trailer versus the movie, with Mindy and Ethan being separated from the group, but in the trailers having it look like they're all together. The Ghostface slowly creeping closer and closer to Mindy was so suspenseful, and the flickering lights were a great choice. It was absolutely terrifying as Mindy was being stabbed and everyone around her was asleep or rocking out with their headphones on or eyes closed. In retrospect, maybe that scene was supposed to be a metaphor somehow for letting crimes and terrible things like stabbing or sexual assaults happen in front of you and either not noticing because the setting is too small and crowded. This might be a stretch assuming that, but I feel like all films nowadays have scenes like that that are really supposed to get you thinking. Now, another poor segue onto a new topic with the mention of thinking. I really liked the short-lived little twist where Detective Bailey tells Sam that Kirby was discharged from the FBI and is on a down spiral mentally, and it's actually Ghostface. My jaw dropped. Now, I know that people probably suspected from that point on that Detective Bailey was in on the Ghostfacing, but I was invested, and it seemed reasonable that Kirby could be orchestrating the whole thing. Even though that would maybe be slightly lazy writing to have a legacy character turn into Ghostface after 12 years of reliving an encounter like Kirby experienced. But when it came to the Ghostface reveal, honestly, I wasn't as shocked or surprised as I felt I was going to be. I had no idea who Ghostface was going to be, but when it was revealed to be Quinn, Ethan, and Detective Bailey, I was like, okay. I mean, it worked, I guess, and there's no topping that awesome synchronized double Ghostface knife wipe moment, but I truly felt underwhelmed with the Ghostface reveal. And especially with these killers being Richie's family, I get that this film was in some way supposed to mimic Scream 2 in a way, having Ghostface related to the killer from the original, but I really think the franchise can only pull this gimmick so many times before it starts to get old. And unfortunately, it felt overused in this film for me, even though it's only the second sequel in the new Scream requel franchise. I know that in a world where every week there's a new limited series or movie on streaming services related to true crime and serial killers, so it's not surprising that in the Scream universe, people are idolizing Ghostface, the stab movies, and the many Woodsboro and Woodsboro-adjacent murder cases. And in Richie's case, making their own fan films referencing that. I understand honoring your crazy dead son's legacy, but I found the lines about finishing Richie's movie and telling Sam to put on Billy's Ghostface mask and kill someone a little weird. I personally cannot understand what it feels like to lose your child and then be face-to-face with the person that killed them. But in the context of the film, Sam did it rightfully so. Otherwise, the body count of Scream 5 probably would have been a whole lot higher. We get a Randy Meeks-esque breakdown of the type of movie we're in from Mandy Meeks-Martin, who makes a comment about Letterboxd users that made me feel like Maddie in Euphoria watching Lexi's play.
Wait, is this fucking play about us?
In this lovely spiel, Mindy says that Quinn and Ethan are arguably 2 of the suspects highest on the list, being the newest additions to the group and somehow both ending up living with the all-new cast from Scream 5, or in the universe as the latest Woodsboro murder survivors. This is quickly overturned when Quinn dies, and honestly, I forgot one of the great horror movie rules. If they don't show the death scene on screen, they're not really dead.
Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy. Your core audience just expects it. And number 3, if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never, ever...
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
I do have some questions relating to Quinn's fake death, though. Did they know that Sam's love interest, Danny, could see into Quinn's room from his apartment and needed to make sure they had all bases covered? Or are they like method actors and needed to do all this to make their story seem realistic? And to my knowledge, Sam and Richie had dated for about 6 months. Did she never meet or see a photo of his family? He never said anything in Scream 5 about not talking to his family, and personally, if I was dating someone and 6 months in they had never mentioned their family or wanted to introduce me to them, I would be a little suspicious. Ethan and Quinn probably did the majority of the killings in the film. Or maybe Detective Bailey was just always very quick in getting back into his detective role after killing. Ghostface was a lot more brutal in this film, doing more wild jumps, leaps, and kills overall. It was awesome to watch on screen. However, Ethan and Quinn are both fairly small and thin, and it didn't look like either of them were super muscular either. So, like, how did they do it? Ghostface typically gets hit in the face with vases and other breakable glass objects, and I'm probably around the age that Quinn was supposed to be, and I know that if I got hit in the face, even with a Ghostface mask on, it'd probably still hurt like a bitch and knock me down for a little while. And wouldn't that leave bruises or something? It would make sense that Quinn would be killed off first. A lot of the time we see her in short pajamas or just in a robe, so any bruises on her would have been a lot more visible based off her wardrobe, though I guess since she's a very sex-positive character, she could just say they're hickeys or something.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
There were a couple things that didn't really work in this film for me. As I said, it's not a perfect movie. First, does everyone have a wicked healing factor now? Mindy was brutally stabbed but arrived at the ambulance at the end, moving like she hadn't just been gutted in the subway a couple hours ago. Tara is stabbed multiple times during the third act, and even when it's over, she isn't seen wincing from the pain. Maybe it's the shock or adrenaline, but I think it would have been nice to see people actually affected by their injuries. I'm also starting to think that Chad is the new Dewey of the franchise entries. He got stabbed like 30 times repeatedly and somehow still survived with no medical attention right away. Samara Weaving should have gotten on whatever magic healing stuff the Core 4 was on to survive all those injuries in a few hours. Next up was Kirby's wig. It may just be because I work full-time as an editor and notice continuity stuff really easily, but holy shit, it was a bad, bad wig. In one shot it would be curled, and in the next it would be basically straight. Was there something so wrong with Hayden Panettiere's real hair that they had to wig her up? Could this film, with its $35 million budget, not have bought a better wig? Pretty much everything else in the character aesthetics department was bang on for everyone else. Hair, makeup, costumes. Why was a character who everyone was so stoked to have back in such a terrible wig? Third, I get giving Sam a love interest gave us a new suspect, provided a helping hand with the ladder scene, and showed that Sam is still emotionally vulnerable and not just there to be a concerned older sister. But Danny's character really didn't do anything for me. He was just there probably so they could pull off that ladder scene, which was really awesome, by the way. My fourth complaint isn't so much about the actual movie, but I guess just more of a post-production thing. All the non-diegetic music, meaning all the songs in the movie that are not heard by the characters, were all a little too royalty-free pop for me. They play like 3 songs back-to-back in the opening, and I was starting to get 2016 Suicide Squad flashbacks where they played like 20 different songs in the first 18 minutes. They should have gone with modernized covers of 90s songs, a la Florence and the Machine covering No Doubt's Just a Girl for Yellow Jackets, or on The Last of Us when they have a cover of Depeche Mode's Never Let Me Down Again covered to fit the context of the show. I really did not want to hear a Demi Lovato song during the credits. The film's composers, Brian Tyler and Sven Valkener, did a great job with the score, but the soundtrack just didn't feel screamy enough for me. Should have brought back Red Right Hand by Nick Cave. My final complaint is about CGI Skeet Ulrich. It was cool the first time it happened, but it just looks bad and uncanny now. They could have done a lot better with just voices, or even like in Raimi's Spider-Man's where the Green Goblin's mask talks to him instead of a CGI Willem Dafoe staring back at himself. I hope in Scream 7 they stray away from Sam's Loomis heritage. There's really not a whole lot more they can do with that. Our core 4, Sam, Tara, Mindy, and Chad, are really the stars of the film, obviously. And it's not like there's a whole lot of other living legacy characters to bring in to give advice or to cameo. So we're lucky that Courtney Cox returned to play the investigative journalist, writer, news anchor, and final girl punching bag, Gale Weathers. Gale's appearances are brief, but fitting. I thought the scene where Sam tries to punch her was a nice nod and homage to Sydney doing so in the original Scream. The audience got a nice chuckle when Tara sucker punched her right after. It was a little disappointing to me that even though Gale exits Scream 5 saying she won't cover the murders, but instead will write a piece on Dewey's heroism, that as soon as she shows up in this film, she's gone and written about the re-murders in Woodsboro and capitalizing on a tragedy and trauma again. Aside from that little bit of character undevelopment, we do get a really good chase scene with Ghostface and Gale through her very expensive and industrial-looking apartment. I don't think that Scream 5 had a really honest to the original trilogy chase scene, so it was nice to see that return in this entry. And it's not the only one. We get a shorter but still really cool chase scene through the abandoned theater that now serves as the Ghostface shrine for the Kirsch family. They did a really good job with that theater. It looks like an actual abandoned theater, and there's some really cool callbacks to the previous films through the relics scattered about the room in museum-like cases. I didn't notice at the time, but they do sort of allude to Detective Bailey's association with the killings by saying that the copycat Ghostfaces probably bought all this evidence off cops looking to make a buck. Bailey wasn't looking to make any money off this, but he was definitely sneaking that evidence out like they said. The theater is a great place for the final act. The streets of New York are too vast and there's too many ways to get away. The carpenter's apartment is too small and it was too late in the film to introduce a whole new location to us. Plus, having everyone locked in the building was a nice way to up the stakes. We get some really good scenes in here. Early on in the film, Kirby and Mindy Q&A each other on horror films, giving us lots of little references to other franchises. And maybe you were like me and playing along with them in your head. Chad and Tara also share their first kiss here. I'm a fan of this pairing, to be honest, and I thought their scene at the abandoned concession stand was really well executed. Even their scene in Tara's room is nice. However, I would have liked a tiny bit more backstory as to when they started crushing on each other.
I still prefer the Babadook.
I saw Scream 6 in 3D in one of the biggest screening rooms at my local theater, with a mostly packed Thursday night, first and only showing of the night audience. I found the 3D didn't actually really add a whole lot to the movie for me, and it's a pain to wear the cheap plastic 3D glasses over my actual glasses. If I was to rewatch this film, I would probably seek out a non-3D showing. On the topics of audiences, there are upsides and downsides to seeing a movie on opening weekend. When I went to see Megan in January on its Thursday night opening, a horde of rambunctious teens were there. The manager gave a speech to us during the trailers, telling everyone, but mostly the teens, to be respectful audience members during the film. They had about 3 or 4 employees lurking around the auditorium during the theater, during the movie, to make sure there was no funny business happening during the film. They really should have done that at the 9 p.m. screening of 2022's Firestarter I attended, where a couple got frisky on the floor and the chairs of the auditorium that the film was screened in. Luckily, no funny business went on during my screening of Scream 6. But back to my Scream 6 conclusion, and ignoring all the comments I just made about opening weekend theater experiences and audiences, I would recommend seeing this in the theater. Movies are meant to be seen in a theater setting, especially if they're optimized for 3D like this one. Scream 6 is a fun watch, but not a perfect movie, that honors the legacy of the Scream franchise and its characters. Let me know what you thought about Scream 6 down in the comments. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'm G. I've been your writer and host for today's review and show, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching Reviews from Hell.